I think we have Steve Kovac, our tech correspondent, to talk a little bit about Apple and Berkshire kind of lightening up, Steve. So, as I said, we spent all day yesterday talking about Apple's financial engineering and the fact that they're sharing all this cash with shareholders. And here you have a little bit of a trim, a profit-taking move, I would say, by Warren Buffett.
Yeah, and this could also, Mike, kind of attribute to some of the slump that we've seen in Apple shares all quarter, or the first quarter of the year, rather, underperforming those big tech peers that we've just seen get such a huge lift off of artificial intelligence promises and the like. With Apple, it's been such a different story for the first 3 months of the year. First of all, no artificial intelligence story to tell in the sense of generative AI that's really captured everyone's imagination. Of course, I was with Tim Cook just a couple days ago when they reported earnings, and he was telling me about the anticipated artificial intelligence announcement that they're going to have next month at the Worldwide Developers Conference, or at least that's when we presume it's going to happen. But it's also been these iPhone sales that have been a real drag on the company. iPhone sales were down 10% for the quarter. Now, Apple says that's a one-off thing, that there's some kind of COVID production wonkiness that happened at the end of 2022 that caused some people to start buying at a different time and so on and so forth. But he also told me that China is improving and that China sales, iPhone sales, that is, in mainland China, not greater China, but mainland China, actually grew in the quarter. That kind of counters this narrative that we had been hearing all quarter long, that sales were just kind of falling off a cliff and it was like an iPhone apocalypse out there in China. That did not materialize. In fact, quarter over quarter, the China business is improving, and Cook told me that he's quite optimistic about China in the long term still, despite this short-term bump that we're seeing. And then, of course, the question is, how much of that decline that we've seen in Apple shares was from these Berkshire sales throughout the quarter as well, guys?
Yeah, obviously a significant, bit of selling pressure, although I would say Apple's a vast company, and, you can, one thing I believe that Berkshire probably tries to do is be smart about how they're, lightening up their positions. But you're right, it does reflect the fact that people, in general, investors seem like Apple stock up a lot last year. The growth outlook may be a little bit more muddled. Although I would say, Steve, that the rationale initially, and as Warren has explained it over the years, is that he considers it a branded consumer staples company, in a sense. Slow and steady, huge installed base. The services business looks great. People don't get rid of their iPhones. Yeah.
And it's the moat, too. And our Kif Lesswing on CNBC.com kind of wrote about this theme, that moat might not be as strong as it used to be. We are seeing so many regulatory challenges across the world, especially in Europe, kind of forcing Apple to open up its ecosystem to allow more competitors in. That's a moat breakdown and could potentially give people to stop buying iPhones if it plays out the way the EU would probably like it. And then not to mention the Department of Justice antitrust case that was filed this spring against Apple as well, covering a lot of those same issues. And then on top of that, there's the DOJ antitrust case against Google, which in a weird way impacts Apple because Google pays Apple up to $20 billion. That's part of services revenue to be that default search engine. So that's another thing. But look, also on this earnings, you got to kind of wonder if there's a one-off thing or what, but this is like a slump buster earnings. After, so much negative story around Apple this entire first few months of the year, there's a more positive story, at least on this earnings call, not just the buyback, but also a return to growth coming in the June quarter. That's what they guided to. And then also teasing up this big artificial intelligence announcement coming next month, guys.
Yeah, and Steve, if you talk to the Verizons and the AT&Ts, AT&T specifically said that they saw a slowdown in sales of smartphones, not just for Apple, also Samsung, but they attributed it really more. I spoke with the CFO at the time of AT&T. He attributed it more to just the idea that these phones last a lot longer. The new phones didn't really have things that made people decide they had to go out and get new ones. It was the same story when we spoke to Irv Blumkin earlier this weekend. He's the CEO of Nebraska Furniture Mart. And he said, yeah, they saw a slowdown, too, in sales of smartphones. But I wouldn't write that off as being the idea of Apple losing any of its really great holding power with people who have those phones and are in the ecosystem. That would be the one thing. Maybe it's slowed down, but as these earnings showed, it wasn't that big of a deal. Just for the short term. And
it's under threat for sure. And then Verizon told the same story. We had Hans Vestberg on after his earnings. He was on your show saying a very similar thing. Just, they need innovative devices to get people to upgrade, every 2 years instead of every 3 to 5 years. That is a big thing. So that is why there's enormous pressure, not just on this artificial intelligence announcement for Apple, but also in the fall to do something new with the iPhone 16, perhaps on the AI front, that will convince people to upgrade maybe sooner than they normally would, Becky.